Hello, I'm Alice. I'm 35 years old. My life can't be better described than with the word mediocrity. A typical married life with the most ordinary man, a standard office job among similar plankton, and a plain appearance. People sometimes describe such individuals as neither fish nor meat, but my mother taught me not to listen to such sayings, as we all are utterly ordinary in some way. My father left our home and family when I was 5 because my mother kicked him out due to his frequent partying and affairs. Besides me, they had another daughter, my older sister Miva. She started working early to help our mother provide for the family, while I tried to do something around the house to show my willingness to support my mother. You could say we had a friendly female society, with no man stepping foot in our home. Miva protected me at school when peers picked on me because of my face, which they found, as they put it, unattractive, having learned a new word from our literature teacher. This woman had a significant influence on the little hooligans, often commenting on the simplicity of my entire image, including my character. Even today, when asked to describe myself, say, in an interview, I can't highlight anything specific, except that sometimes I express my thoughts better in writing than in words. Miva thinks I just haven't yet discovered my full potential and need a bit more time, while I have already resigned myself to my fate. What now? Can't a secondary citizen exist alongside the main actors? In school, I had a couple of friends, but mostly my interaction began and ended with my sister, who gave me much more pleasant emotions. While those monkeys jumped around us, not daring to say anything directly because of Miva's presence, I could continue chatting with her, proving nothing to anyone. We shared interests, like watching cartoons in the morning and evening, which we could discuss for hours, while the girls in my class talked about expensive dolls and their boring surroundings. Such social conversations, as you might have guessed, were alien to me. Surely my sister interacted with me out of pity, which greatly angered me when I came to such conclusions. Sometimes, to go somewhere with me on my unexpected desire, she would cancel meetings with friends, and when I asked her not to do so, she confidently stated that they understood and were not offended. Tell me, would you believe that? Personally, I would be very upset. Miva just smiled at me, starting a different topic, and my childish brain quickly switched to the most interesting topic for me. Although Miva tried to help my mother financially, our mother coped well on her own, so I can't say we lived poorly, maybe even slightly above the middle class. We had a fairly large house, about 70 square meters, as far as I remember, a wide variety of clothing and accessories, including my mother's, and the money Miva earned, our mother allowed her to spend however she wanted. As I turned 16 and my sister 21, our communication, surprisingly, became much more desired and richer. She enrolled in a good college in our sizable town, so she didn't go anywhere, but my mother and I forced her to finally put her desires above our whims. So Miva started hanging out with her college friends. She was never ordinary. Once, she invited me to go to a club with her, even sharing this idea with our mother, who allowed it, but only if Miva was nearby. My sister and I dressed up, put on makeup, even tried to do something with our hair under our mother's careful guidance, and were ready to tear up the dance floor. There, I'll say straight out, I met my current husband, David. The moment my gaze caught him, he, all young and handsome, stood among a crowd of pretty girls, surrounded by their oohs and ahs. Of course, I immediately turned to my sister with questions about that interesting stranger. She just waved it off, urging me to drop this idea, telling me that he knew how to keep something in his pants, making him a real ladies' man. Remembering my father, I sighed sadly and decided that indeed, I did not want to see such a man by my side. I think he didn't care at all which girl to grace with his attention. After a couple of hours, it was my turn. He, slightly drunk, approached me, asking who I was and what I was looking for. He paid me a lot of compliments, and I just silently drank my milkshake, looking at him as if he was mentally limited. I myself don't understand what caught his attention in me. Maybe just the fact that I refused to pay attention to him, even for a minute of attachment. Or maybe he saw my soul somewhere deep inside. But eventually, his courtship began to resemble love. and all he asked of me was platonic love. Even Miva and her friends were amazed at how I managed to reform a notorious womanizer, especially being 5 years younger than him. I considered it my little victory, thinking only about this, rolling my eyes at another gift from David. Still, since we got married, you probably realize that he managed to impress me. At first, I felt sorry for him, but later, after a couple of dates and a period of endlessly chasing after me, he openly declared his willingness to wait as long as it took for my consent, as he was madly in love. For me, it was an incredibly brave act, so I entered into a relationship with him as soon as I turned 18. My life then unfolded similarly to my sister's, except she had already married and become pregnant, which made my mother and I incredibly happy. We were certain she had always dreamed of this. Her boyfriend was incredibly sweet, deeply in love with her and their future child, for which we were all grateful to him and fate for bringing such a worthy man into Miva's life. I only met David's parents 4 years into our relationship. By then, I had finished college and was working as a senior marketing officer in one of the city's major corporations. Let's just say, the first meeting with David's mother and father was not very successful. They immediately started whispering about my appearance, discussing my ridiculous style of clothing, dull complexion, tasteless manicure, and mediocre looks. To be fair, my boyfriend was angry at them, accusing them of having no hospitality, while I could only sigh heavily, pretending not to hear them discussing me at full volume, while sitting opposite at the table. Susan, the mother-in-law that every girl fears to have, did nothing but pick on me, criticize, and make snide remarks. Michael, the father-in-law, loved to taunt me about being younger than his son, and therefore should be a submissive, beautiful wife, chuckling at his own phrase. By the end of our pleasant gathering, I simply stood up and left in silence. No, I didn't feel like crying, but I also didn't want to listen to the endless stream of insults these two old people were heaping on me, nor wait for David. I took a taxi straight to my father's house to discuss this unacceptable behavior with my mother. My mother and sister, who visited our home with her daughter Ophelia, nodded in agreement as they listened to my complaints about my future relatives. They suggested I either cut off communication with them or minimize it. Sadly, I didn't live up to my dear lady's expectations. David, despite seeing how they treated me, turned out to be a complete egoist, suggesting we live with them for a while to save on rent and buy our own apartment or house sooner. Yes, their family home was a large 3-story building, and we were to live on the 3rd floor, which had everything for living, including our own bathroom and balcony, making it unnecessary to go downstairs, except maybe to the kitchen. Something in my brain stopped functioning, and I agreed, thinking it was an incredible idea. It was like a mouse deciding to live in a snake's nest. Time passed, but nothing changed. David worked, as did I. I managed to save only a third of the necessary amount over several years, while my now husband collected a meager few percent. We paid for utilities, installed a fridge on our floor, and even paid rent, which his parents insisted on. Of course, David hoped to split the utilities, but it turned out differently. I was transferred to freelance due to a lack of space in the office building, so I spent most of my time at home, occasionally going to the office to submit important documents and oversee new subordinates or ongoing processes. Meanwhile, Susan and Michael alternated visits to our floor. I was ready to ban them from coming here as tenants, but David said it would be too cruel, so I resigned myself. Their nitpicking reached the point where I was a bad daughter-in-law because I refused to go to sales like Black Friday. Remember, although there are significant discounts, penny pinchers like Susan are ready to bite your hand or leg for a necessary or not item, and I could buy whatever I wanted without waiting for sales. When I explained this to her, cutting off her channels with arguments, she started to reproach me for not having children, as I was already 34 and my biological clock was ticking. Frankly, the incredible opportunity of being pregnant doesn't appeal to me. I would lose the figure I worked hard for years to maintain. My health would suffer, as would my mental state. Not to mention, I'd have to endure sleepless nights listening to the cries of a little miracle next door. which I heard plenty about from Miva. David and I agreed that if one day we wanted a child, the doors of orphanages are open to us, thanks to our income and, in perspective, our own home. Then Michael began his attacks. He still loved to rub my age in my face, calling me a silly little girl, silencing me. Any argument I had in discussions was nullified by his insistence that I was too young and knew nothing about life. My references to being already too old to have children were rudely cut off by him, again and again, raising his voice, making me just nod silently to my own thoughts and either go back to our floor or return to my mother. Meanwhile, while I was on the front lines, trying to get a breath of fresh air in a house that, I remind you, was serpentine, David started going on frequent and prolonged business trips. He was incredibly happy about them every time, his eyes shining, as he said that he was paid fabulous sums and that soon we would move. Of course, I was incredibly happy for him, saw him off to the airport, kissed him, and wished him luck. In return, after coming back, he gave me so much love, more than I got without him by my side. Miva's daughter turned 10 years old. As a well-off beloved aunt, I gave her a ticket to Disneyland, suggesting we go there together. Ophelia burst into tears. This adorable girl simply adored this place, having dreamt of visiting it for years, while Miva had been postponing it, paying off the mortgage. Of course, my sister was incredibly thankful to me, saying she would be incredibly grateful if I took her niece there. I could only wave it off, saying it was no big deal. The next day, David told me he was going on another business trip to California, where Disneyland is located. I smiled at him, saying nothing about my own trip to that state. Anyway, what difference did it make? He rarely called me when he was away, saying he barely had time to sleep. Obviously, he wouldn't have time to meet me there, and I, upon his return, would just brag about taking my niece. A couple of weeks later, a few days after David's departure, Ophelia and I went on our little journey. I took photos with her everywhere, sending them to Miva, who said she was white with envy that her daughter had such an aunt like me. We managed to visit a couple more interesting attractions, leaving Disneyland for dessert. However, the day Ophelia's dream came true, my life turned upside down. Crossing the fairy tale gates of a place where children from all over the world dream of going, Ophelia was ecstatic. We leisurely tried various attractions, took souvenir photos, then went to the themed stores to buy some souvenirs for home. The most brilliant idea that came to my mind was to buy David a Mickey Mouse ears headband, while my niece wandered between rows of various paraphernalia, meticulously choosing something. An hour later, we left that little shop, finding ourselves on the street. After buying some fast food, we sat under the shade of a tree where a lone bench was. Ophelia sat, happily swinging her legs, endlessly thanking me and rejoicing at the opportunity, while I listened to her and, closing my eyes, smiled. "Aunt Alice, isn't that Uncle David over there? Is he here too?" Ophelia exclaimed excitedly, pointing me to the crowd of people. I sighed, understanding that the girl was just mistaken. But under her insistence, I looked up, noticing David in the midst of a bunch of people, accompanied by some woman. He had his arm around her waist, kissing her, and she responded in kind. "Is that his girlfriend?" "I really don't know," I said, frozen, trying to find my phone in my pocket before they moved too far away. I called David's number, still hoping that if this man didn't reach for his phone, then it wasn't him. "Hello, hi, you're at work, right?" I asked calmly. "Hi, yeah, it's not really convenient for me to talk right now," he started. "Stop," I exclaimed. David, standing in the distance, froze, obeying my sharp command. I took Ophelia by the hand, led her to one of the stalls, and quickly followed these two. "Turn around." David and I locked eyes. I lowered my hand from my ear, almost unable to hold the phone. He looked at me with fear, mixed with shame and regret. The girl, standing next to him, stepped slightly to the side and behind, pretending to be interested in the animators wandering around. "Business trip?" I simply asked. "Yes." David coughed in response, unwilling to deny it. "I've changed. You chased me for 2 years, saying you were over your wild days, and what do I see?" I accused him, not holding back. except in terms of expressions. After all, there were children around. Mom introduced me to Emily, the daughter of her old acquaintance, David explained. And you immediately unzipped your pants and agreed, without thinking long. You're an adult, don't you have a head on your shoulders? Did your mother want to become related to her dear friend's family? Listen, Liz, let's talk about this later. What is it? You don't want to ruin your mood, do you? Mine's already ruined. Fucking egomaniac. You should be on your knees for me. What a disgrace. I started wailing, rubbing the bridge of my nose. What did I expect when I married you? I shrieked, took off the ring, slipped it to David, and then slapped him, giving that poor Emily a disgruntled look. And you, young lady, you'd better think twice about dating a cheater. You think you'll change him? As you can see, people don't change. All the best to you. I turned on my heels and waved goodbye. Ophelia saw the whole scene, which I only noticed later. This little girl supported me on the way to the hotel, and even there, she alone was calming me down, supporting me, and speaking words as if I was talking to Miva personally. My tears, accompanied by the realization that I wasted so many years for nothing, she denied, saying that there were more positive moments, meanwhile noting that I'm still young and beautiful. I could only kiss the forehead of this wonderful child, feeling the salty taste of my own tears on my lips, saying 1,000 words of gratitude. The next day, David mustered up the courage to call me to resolve some organizational issues. It hurt me to hear his detached tone, where bitterness was also present. Maybe he really felt ashamed. He told me that Susan had become a mute mediator in relations with Emily to secure grandchildren for herself. He also said that he was ready to divide our jointly acquired property without any claims, not claiming the part that I had saved for an apartment. I barely squeezed out a quick thank you, suggesting to discuss all this after his return. He agreed. Ophelia and I returned only in the evening the next day. I handed the child over to Miva and headed to the snake's nest. There, I began to frantically pack my things, as Michael and Susan did not even dignify me with not just a greeting, but even a simple glance. Throwing everything into bags haphazardly, I waited outside the house for the moving company, texting Miva. Behind me, I heard a heavy stomping, and then, at the doorstep of the house, an enraged Susan appeared. You shameless girl, where do you think you're going? You've wanted to get rid of me for a long time, haven't you? Or is it just that painful to lose an extra passive income? I retorted coldly, turning around. Do you know what a disgrace this is for my son, huh? Fool, she screamed, beginning to approach me. I saw her fists clenching. Involuntarily, taking a step back, I kept a close eye on her hands. Maybe it's only your fault? I'm not going to live with horns on my head all my life, while you lull the children fathered by David. I continued the argument, gripping my bag of clothes tighter, ready to hit Susan with it if necessary. Unexpectedly, to the left of me, where the pink bushes of my mother-in-law grew, there was a rustling. Then, a cat jumped out in front of me, beginning to fiercely hiss at Susan. It all happened so fast that I didn't even have time to recover. The cat bristled terribly and almost screamed, advancing on the old woman. It was the same cat that I had been feeding for about 5 months, remembering that Susan had a strong allergy to cat fur. The mother-in-law immediately froze, grabbed her nose, wanting to bypass the wild animal. But the cat scratched her leg with its claws, tearing the skin to blood. She screamed and disappeared into the house. Then, the cat turned to me, sat down all important, and expectantly looked at me. I laughed at the courage of this little creature, beginning to thank and pet him on the head. Oh, mister, I hesitated. Midnight, I offer you to become my new roommate. I hope you don't mind. I picked up the cat, and it rubbed its head against my chin, showing approval. I had to live with my mother for a while until she reminded me that she had an apartment from my grandmother in one of the not-so-new buildings in the city center. Without thinking for long, I quickly moved there with my new pet, whom I could really consider a real man. The divorce process ended quickly, where David kept face, allowing me to take even a part of his parents' savings. In the hallway of the courtroom, After the end of the process, I heard Susan and Michael blaming their own son for everything in the world, and Emily standing somewhere to the side, with a rounded belly. I can only wish her luck and a quick separation from this troubled family.